Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the interview, I just want to say a big thank you to the folks at Pega Systems for sponsoring my podcast for the coming few weeks. You can join Pega from October the 7th for a series of free online events that are focused on shaping the future of business and designing today's tech to solve for tomorrow's challenges. Now, whether your focus is one-to-one customer engagement, customer service, or intelligent automation, there's going to be a virtual event tailored just for you. You'll be able to watch live demos and hear inspiring stories from world-leading organizations in a time zone that suits you. So, go to pega.com and search for Discover, and you will quickly and easily find the event page where you will be able to register for free. I'll see you there. Now, let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have my friend, I'd like to say, Sandra Thompson, who has been described, or describes herself, in fact, as a CX educator, the first Goldman emotional intelligence coach in the UK, a CX consultant using emotional intelligence to create memorable experiences, a TEDx speaker, she says, in training, but I know it's coming up, a keynote speaker and a part-time lecturer, and I can't believe I said all that in one breath, but Sandra, hello, welcome to the podcast.
Do you know, it's like the beginning of a story, the beginning and the end, but is it the end? I know, it's a portfolio career. Thank you for having me here.
You're very welcome. Now, I don't know, is there any more to add to that? Or can you tell us a bit, tell us a bit about yourself, Sandra, and put some color to all those different kind of labels. Tell us a bit about actually the work that you kind of do.
Yeah, sure. So I think the underlying motivation, if people haven't already guessed it, is this whole thing around learning and also sharing what I've learned. So I think I'm probably a bit of an aspiring academic, although I probably never admit it. So the kind of curiosity to get to the bottom of things, to ask questions, kind of means that I'm just intrigued by things like neuroscience and behavioral science. I don't know it all, obviously, but I'm on that quest. So what that means is that I teach undergraduate at Pearson Business School in London. I run my own course. I also do a bit of consultancy, and I'm doing this kind of coaching thing more recently, which is, it's just a phenomenal opportunity and a gift, actually. That's what that is.
Awesome. Now, I was recently approached by an agent of someone who was keen to get on the podcast. And they position themselves as like this emotional intelligence expert. And I thought, hang on, that's not right. I know somebody who's an emotional intelligence expert who's closer to me, actually, is my friend. And I thought, actually, rather than having them on, who I didn't know, I thought I'd have you on the podcast. So that was kind of so welcome again. But before we get into the whole emotional intelligence and emotion and empathy and all that sort of like stuff, which is a big, big topic and very much the front of mind of many people right now, what I wanted to kind of ask you was, first of all, to get your take on the last few months, and we've seen organizations go through some massive kind of changes, and I just wanted to get your take on, from your perspective, is what's stood out and what's been the big lessons and takeaways. Oh, and by the way, how are you?
I'm really well. I'm really well. And actually, I've been teaching online. So while I've had a switch in the way that I do things, I've still been actually, luckily, very, very busy. But I have been paying more attention. So your question is a great one. One of the things that really stands out for me is tolerance, and that's across the board. I felt like I was certainly personally tolerating a lot, a kind of lower customer experience at the start of this lockdown thing.
Right.
But as we've been getting back in to the swing of things, as it were, as things start to go back to a new normal, whatever that is, I'm less tolerant because I'm thinking, come on, get your act together.
Pull your socks
We're
up.
done with that. Exactly. The other thing that I'm shocked about, and I'm sure that organizations have a good reason, but I recently bought a flat, and the people who I was dealing with were snowed under because the other staff they had were still on furlough. So while I was having a shoddy service because no one could deal with me quick enough, I was thinking, why are you not bringing your staff back? This is doing damage to your reputation because you can't keep up. So I think it's organizations stepping up now because people are expecting more, because they're done with the whole, we kind of let you off for a little bit. That's what I'm kind of feeling generally.
Right. But also the kind of to going back to the kind of the core of what I wanted to talk to you about, as we've navigated our way through this pandemic, and it's not over by any stretch of the imagination. We've seen more and more folks starting to talk about the need for and the value of empathy, and you talked about tolerance as, I guess, as a part of that, particularly when it comes to service interactions. And that's kind of come on top of a lot of interest, as I said before, in emotion in the last couple of years. And now you're talking about emotional intelligence, which I know a little bit about because I did some training with a chap, an Australian kind of like emotional intelligence chap, who's talking about emotional intelligence in leadership and things. But before we get going, tell me from your perspective, what's the difference in relationship between emotion, empathy, and emotional intelligence? Or is it all in one and the same thing?
I think the best way to describe it is emotional intelligence is like the umbrella for these things. Emotional intelligence is your kind of ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and in others. And then it's your ability to manage your behavior and your relationships. So if I said to you, you could have empathy without being emotionally intelligent,
right.
You can listen and you can put yourself into that person's shoes without having all of the other 12 competencies, because we know that emotional intelligence is a skill that you develop over time, and there are 4 main chunks. There's that emotional self-awareness, there's social awareness, there's like management of your emotions and relationship management. So you can have empathy without emotional intelligence, but you can't have emotional intelligence without empathy. And this whole thing around emotion is the thing that drives everything, all of us. And we talk about emotion quite a lot within customer experience. But I always question people and say, how do you define it? How do you know what you're feeling? How do you know what other people are feeling? And when you know, what do you do about it?
Sure. And I guess also kind of like I find it quite strange, because like it's a bit like going, somebody's upset or somebody's angry, and well, the level of kind of emotion and feeling that will be dependent on one, their experience and their life experience, and also their character as well, in terms of how they feel about things, how much importance they place on them, and kind of what sort of feelings that they have, right?
Do you know, I battle with this, Adrian, every time someone asks me about empathy and emotional intelligence, because the neuroscientists say that everyone's emotions are particularly unique to them. And if you think about it, how you're socialized, how you were brought up, your values, your beliefs, your experiences are your own.
Yeah.
And so if we think about that just for a second, how on earth am I going to empathize with you? I mean, I might have had a similar type of experience. I might sense a sadness or a joy or something like that, but I can't possibly relate to you because I haven't lived your life. So, there's a school of thought that says, you might want to go for rational compassion, which is I'm going to use a bunch of skills to help you express how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all I can do. I can observe your emotion, but I can't possibly be empathetic because I'm not you. So I battle with that quite a lot, and I haven't concluded it yet. I'll come back to you when I have.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to get me shot down in flames, but I would almost kind of like suggest that is there not kind of room in the domain of empathy to include rational compassion?
Yeah, and I think that so I think it's Paul Bloom who writes about this stuff, and he talks about using skills like active listening, like really paying attention. And there's no question that you're going to recognize and connect, you're going to build rapport through that recognition. So I think there is a halfway house. I just like to find a word for it.
Yeah, I'm not going to, not good at making up words on the spot. Probably get me into trouble. But I mean, do we need more of it now? More empathy and emotional intelligence more than ever? I mean, with all that's going on in the world, I mean, and what value does it bring to us? And what value does it bring to sort of a service and experience? Because some people might kind of turn around and it's like, why don't we just get better at being more functional, i.e. making things faster and easier, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we could be here a long time on that question, but what I would say is that Richard Chataway, so he's a behavioral scientist. I remember him talking to me about AI and about the role that our species have now. What's our role if these machines or this data is going to take over all of these types of things? What's our role? And one of the things that makes us unique is our ability to feel and express and to have emotions. And I think, now there has never been a more important time to just stop for a minute and consider how you're feeling. We see reactions daily. We probably react ourselves. If we took a moment to just feel that emotion and try and understand it, to recognize it, and then to say, oh, do you know what? The reason why I'm feeling like that is because of X. I can do something about that, which means that we have better relationships with people. Because I don't know about you, but when I react, I've normally got to repair that because I've lashed out or I've said something that's not appropriate. If we think about society now, that's happening more and more. People are more and more angry. People are more and more anxious. Look at the type of people that I'm teaching, the kind of guys that are coming in as leaders of tomorrow. They're feeling all sorts of different sensations. So I would say understanding and recognizing the emotion, at least being able to label it. There's a term, isn't there, that's if you can name it, you can tame it. We'll be happier, and I think we'll be healthier if we could tune in and be more aware of our emotions and just be able to decide, do I want that emotion? Does it serve me? Right. Or can I let it go?
Perfect. Now, because the thing, and this is one of the things that I wanted to share with you, because and to maybe ask for some kind of help on this, is because I've been musing kind of lately, and it started in Punk CX that I wrote and that came out last year, that in the face of all of this, that individuals and organizations need to build what I've been calling it an empathetic musculature if they are to thrive. And I wanted to just kind of like throw that idea at you and just go like, what do you think? And do you think that's got any kind of like value as a kind of like a sort of a term? Because it's like, I've got this fuzzy idea in my head what it might be. But what do you think about that? And do you agree? And what do you kind of, from your perspective, how should organizations go about doing that? And does that start with trying to build up your emotional intelligence?
So I think I want to answer that in two ways. So first of all, I want to take the word musculature, that word, which musculature. I always struggle with, typical, that, you have to work at it. You have to exercise it. You have to feed correctly in order for muscles to grow. And that's one of the key things about emotions and emotional intelligence. You're not done with a half-day workshop. It's a lifelong skill that you need to develop and you need to grow and you need to look after. So that's one thing. So I'm very much in agreement with that word. I think the term empathy might be overused, but the point about being empathetic is critical for all of the reasons I said before. I mean, let's think about right now. There are people who are being invited, inverted commas, to go back to work. How equipped are leaders and managers and peers, for that matter, to hold a conversation with others about how they're feeling about coming back to work? How much active listening is going on? How many intelligent questions? How many thoughtful moments are there going to be when people come back who are full of fear? They might not want to come back to the office. They might not want to work a particular way.
Sure.
So taking empathetic musculature is certainly an approach, because I think without some type of recognition of how the other person might feel is, I think, at worst negligent, and also it's just not human. It's treating people like robots, and people will leave. People will leave to a more thoughtful and more caring environment.
And this kind of thing, so that's going to require kind of, I guess, organizations to think about, you know, the culture that they have, kind of the capabilities that they have, you know, the attitudes, all those different sort of things, the values that they have, particularly if you're going to be operating, if you like a hybrid model with some remote and some on site, and some, you know, some members of your team can transitioning between the two based on kind of business and individual kind of need. But I guess, I mean, it's a big ask, right? I mean, what do you think about kind of like, and I guess my question would be is like, many people will be thinking like, well, can technology kind of play a role in any of that? Or is this kind of purely about a relational thing?
So I listened to your podcast with, I'm going to say Joshua from Cognito. I'm going to say Joshua Feast.
Joshua Feast from Cogito, yeah.
Cogito, I beg your pardon. So I listened to his talk about the way that technology is equipping individuals to help them become more empathetic. And to a certain extent, I was thinking, this stuff rocks. You know, he's enabling agents, I think it was, to have more empathetic conversations with customers, which meant that not only was their engagement going up, I mean, again, from memory, like 66% or something, and also the results they were getting as well on satisfaction were, you know, double figures. I was thinking, well, that's really great. And then I thought to myself, hold on a second. When they come away from that aid, when they come away from that interface, that technology, are they going to be able to conduct conversations with their peers and with their managers, leaders, team leaders in the same way without that intervention? So I think that technology absolutely has its place. What I think I'm lobbying for is for individuals to create that capability within themselves so that they have consistently good relationships everywhere.
Right. So the technology becomes an enabler, support, rather than a crutch in many ways. Because actually kind of the Cogito kind of like, I spoke to them, subsequently, or after that interview, which was like, 2-3 years ago or something. And they have data that shows that actually the agents that use the Cogito's coaching sort of technology to rather allow them to manage kind of more difficult conversations with customers, is it does help them build capability,
right?
And so it's not a crutch, as it were, and therefore I think that I'm right in saying that even when you kind of take that capability or that technology away as an enabler, their performance still stands above people that haven't used it, and it atrophies at a slower rate,
right,
as it were. So it does help kind of like manage kind of performance, but it does improve the underlying capability, as well.
No, that's great. And the other technology, which from an ethics point of view, I'm still working it out. But the whole biometrics thing,
Hmm.
when you take a measurement of someone's heart rate and their temperature and the porosity of their skin, because we know that emotions are felt before they're thought. It's this can't go into all of that, but the fact is that in research, when you use biometrics, you might find a slightly different response, or quite a striking response, to the one that is articulated verbally. People don't intend to tell fibs, but very often they can't quite figure out what they're feeling, or they're going to tell you
Mm.
what they think you want to hear. So the science, the technology that's going on there is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I guess the kind of the question I would say is that, I mean, a lot of this stuff has been around for a while, and there's some really, really good organizations kind of out there. But have you come across any organizations that sort of do this sort of thing, that just have an emotionally intelligent culture, or have by default built their own empathetic musculature, as it were? Um, to give us an example, and also to show people like this can be done, and it's real, and it can be done at scale, and so we can actually look to them and we can try and learn from them.
Mm. Something I've learned recently is around remote organizations. And when I say that, they're established remote organizations.
Right.
They haven't had to work from home as a consequence of all this COVID stuff. They were doing it already.
Yeah.
And from what I've been reading and from some of the conversations I've been having with some of the staff in those types of organizations, they seem to have higher levels of emotional intelligence. And in fact, there's some research that proves they've got 8 different skills, and of those 8, 4 of them are recognized, within the Goldman model, they fit there.
Right.
And if you think about it, it's quite an interesting thing to get your head around, because you've got bunches of people across the globe who don't physically sit in the same space,
Mm-hmm.
and yet through Zoom, through other kind of video conferencing, through the use of great language, curiosity, asking great questions, they seem to have more connection than people who work in office spaces. So I think that there are organizations like Automatic is one. They're
Mm-hmm.
responsible for about 48% of all websites that you see out there. So they're WordPress, but they have higher emotion intelligence scores. The second type of organization, which I find consistently to have more emotional intelligence or more empathy, are the smaller businesses.
Right.
We've been using far more of the local businesses where we live, and that connection, it's definitely that. It's the emotional connection, it's the interest, it's the wanting to do their best and to serve, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to keep going back to them. I don't want to deal with big organizations anymore where I'm just a number, really.
Mm. Mm. Interesting. So actually, yeah, and so Automatic's a really good one, because they're responsible for WordPress and WordPress.com and WordPress.org, which as a content management system powers a high percentage of many of the the websites around the world these days.
Yeah, 48%.
But I think it strikes me as like, if they're very intentional about what they do, and they've had to be because they're working remotely, and that allows them to, because they've got like hundreds, if not thousands, of people as part of their network. But I'm trying to think about, is there a commonality between them and what they do, and also the smaller kind of businesses? Because it seems to me that it strikes me that the smaller businesses, like in smaller teams, what needs to get done isn't quite so divided, as it were. Like it's not quite so specific. The division of labor is not quite so defined, and so everybody kind of mucks in, as it were, and and is happy to take responsibility for what's in front of them and what needs to get done. And I wonder whether large organizations, if they're not careful, just because of their size and how they're organized, militate against that.
I think it would be interesting when organizations, I think Barclays and Twitter, I don't think they've talked about not having offices anymore, if I've got that right. So it will be interesting to see whether or not the new way of working, if it's supported correctly through the right systems and the right kind of backup to enable people to work remotely in a really efficient way, whether they see a change in the types of relationships they have with one another and with their customers. There's something, and this is not the word, it's something like comfort. There's something like comfort of being in control of your space and being in control more of your time, because in the remote workspace, people manage by task. Time is, obviously it's important, but it's not you're in at 9, you're leaving at 5, you know, there's none of that. So there's a kind of empowerment of people to let them be adults and let them get the stuff done, which I wonder if the comfort of knowing you're being trusted helps you relax into just being more attentive. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely something to research, I think.
No, I think that's a kind of fair point. I think trust seems to be seems to be a big part of it. But it actually, as you say, it's like we talk about managing kind of performance where people are near, then it feels kind of easier and simpler just to focus on outcomes. You know, did you get the job done? Does it matter? And does it matter how you got it done? You know, as long as it's within, you know, the right sort of guidelines, so you didn't cut any corners and stuff. But if it's the right outcome, then it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Some people might be able to do it quicker, might take some other people kind of longer, but actually, as long as it's you know, the same outcome, then you might want to try and help somebody get quicker or learn from somebody who can do it faster. And that might be a performance, improvement opportunity. But actually, it's about trusting people to do the job that you hired them for, rather than feeling like you need to kind of like lord it over them and almost like force them to do it. And that's more about control. So it feels that there's this control and trust sort of like spectrum in many ways.
Yeah, and the other thing I've just thought of, actually just popped into my mind, and I don't know what you think about this, Adrian, is the bigger the organization becomes, the more policies and rules exist to manage, in inverted commas, the masses. And if you think about people creating human connections, it's a very individual, spontaneous thing. If you're in a massive corporate, for argument's sake, do you have that freedom to just do those one-off spontaneous things that people actually think, whoa, that is so thoughtful, and I can't believe that they've just done that for me? So I wonder if it's that.
I don't know, but I do know that if in any big organization, if you really want to get something done, then a lot of it's about relationships. It's about who you know. So it's a bit like, let me speak to the person that I know over here to see if they can help me better understand what's the best way to do this. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so it sort of implies that kind of most of the kind of the policies and the processes and the procedures are there to control something, kind of, you know, particularly when you've got these kind of other human systems that sit outside them, which are meant to shortcut or fast track things when you understand the system. Anyway, but I also kind of was thinking about the whole this whole emotional intelligence kind of thing, and then you talk about this idea of understanding, controlling understanding your emotions, understanding the emotions of other people, managing your behavior, and all these different sort of things. And it also struck me as a bit like, that's fine, but it also kind of, there's also a potential that there's some potential dark sides in there, because you could, if you were a master at this, control and your own emotions in such a way that it possibly kind of manipulates other people, right? Because it's almost a bit like, I don't know if it's the right term, gaslighting somebody. Somebody gets upset about something and then you're like, meh.
It is a thing. It's a thing. It is actually called the dark side of emotional intelligence. And if you can imagine someone being able to disguise their true feelings, while so something else is kicking off. Plus, you know, when you know a skill and somebody else doesn't know that skill at all, you could say, yeah, I'm being played here. But I kind of have the opinion that as human beings, are we decent people? Are we decent, authentic? Are we actually here to help and to serve and to want the best? And if you haven't got that mindset, then it can get into the wrong hands. The dark side is a real thing.
So how do you kind of know if kind of like somebody's kind of like gone over to the dark side? Apart from them wearing a Darth Vader kind of cloak.
I have this special detector, and it starts to shine red when I can. No, it's difficult to say, isn't it? I think if you can sense that the purpose or the intention that someone is aiming for is not quite right, then you could probably spot it. But to be honest with you, tricky one. You could have a real Jedi master out there, couldn't you? I don't know. And I kind of go into life thinking that people mostly want the best, and people mostly want to help one another. And just to call it out, if you think that someone is creating an environment or using manipulative language, it can happen with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. I met someone who was I don't know what they call it, a really, really expert person in it. And I watched him create a scenario from the outside. The people inside the situation couldn't see what was going on. And I had to speak to him and just say, this is what I'm seeing. I'm sure it's not your intention, but this is what I'm seeing. So holding other people accountable if you think something's rogue I think is the best thing you can do. Interestingly, Anita Roderick, who was the late CEO of the Body Shop, she's known, apparently, I read this somewhere, she's known for wanting people to kind of have their hearts broken when she was fundraising for charitable causes. So she knew how to get people to really dig deep. And I'm sure that, I don't know who wrote it, whether they were qualified to do so or they knew her personally, but we know that people do it. We know that we're emotional creatures. We know that people can be manipulated to behave in a certain way, but we just got to keep a lookout, I guess.
Yeah. So is there anything kind of like, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've missed out about emotional intelligence, stuff that, if people want to learn kind of like more, where should they go?
Goldman EI is where I was trained, and Goldman EI is an organization now which has lots of coaches, there's lots of courses, certainly the kind of depth of learning is phenomenal. You can take that journey and go as deep as you wish.
And that's Goldman, GOLEMANEI.
And then EI, as in emotional intelligence. So that's a great place to go. They can have a look at what I'm doing on LinkedIn, so they can check out what I'm talking about. There's normally something I'm sharing, or there's a paper I've written, or there's a playbook on offer there. And then there's also a company called 6 Seconds, and they do a lot of work in this space. They're out in the States as well, and they often issue quite a lot of case studies to prove the financial benefit, the relational and the health benefit of being more emotional intelligent. So that's definitely one to check out. That's 6 Seconds.
Is that SIX Seconds?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and because I think that's very cool, and I get all this linked up in the show notes and things as well, and the highlights. But you're a part-time lecturer and an educator. That kind of like some people just want the shortcut, right? And they want to know where to get started. And so if I would say to you to kind of like boil it down and say, people are listening into this or reading the highlights, and they want to know how they want to improve their leadership skills to help them deliver a better experience to their customers and employees. I mean, what would be your top or best advice?
Can I give 2 pieces of advice?
You can give 3 if you like.
Okay, I've got 3. Ready?
All right, crack on.
So the first thing is to pause and to decide to respond rather than react. And that sounds really simple, really, really simple. And that's anything from, I've just read an email, I'm feeling triggered, I'm feeling annoyed, frustrated, all of those things. Rather than send that email straight away, just breathe. and just tune in to what you're feeling. Because actually the reason why you're feeling something could be because this individual knows how to press your buttons and they're doing it, or it
Right.
could be they have zero intention of upsetting you at all. It just so happens to be that X number of years ago someone did this that made you feel a bit vulnerable. So just pause and respond. Make that choice to respond. It makes a massive difference.
Perfect.
The other thing is to write stuff down, and this isn't typing stuff. This is actually getting a pen or a pencil in your hand, in a book or on a scrap of paper, and just write. Even if you set your phone for an alarm for 2 minutes, just write how you're feeling, because neurologically, the process of you thinking and then transferring it to written word helps dramatically for you to unload and also to start to understand how you're feeling and to start seeing patterns so that you can avoid certain circumstances, or you can reframe those particular scenarios so you don't feel that way anymore. Okay. Even if it's 2 minutes a day, you can do that. I'm pretty sure you can do that. That will help. The final thing is gratitude. And I get my coachees to do this if they're able to. Before you go to bed, it's another writing exercise. Before you go to bed, just write down even 3 things that you're grateful for, even if they're tiny, weeny little things, like someone brought me a cup of tea while I was in the middle of a back-to-back day of meetings. Some gesture of kindness, just note it down. It will change your perspective. It really will.
Perfect. I love that. And so I just want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the kind of the future of kind of service and experience. I mean, can you give me your perspective on how you think kind of the whole emotion and empathy, and in particular kind of emotional intelligence, is going to play into the future of service and experience?
So there's the thing I'd like to see, and the thing I'm thinking, wow, it'd be amazing if you could. And I think the realistic thing that is hugely possible soon is the opportunity to be proactive.
Right.
Again, I think there's a Harvard Business Review article a couple of years ago about this. So this is not new news, but think about the number of organizations, the number of brands who proactively do something for you to make your life easier. How often does that happen?
Don't get me started on this. I started banging on about this back in 2013, and it wasn't new then.
But I really want that to happen, because I really think that is going to shift between the brands that survive and those that don't, because I really want people to choose those brands that help them rather than are a hinder. Because we know, particularly in the last few months, time is precious, life is precious. Who's going to waste their time trying to fix something when the organization's left you right in the lurch? That's one thing. And then the second thing, I do wonder whether or not our emotions will be displayed or more visible in another sort of way. I mean, let's think about the Apple Watch for a second. Imagine if that shone a particular color to say, oh, they're feeling like this, they're feeling like that. And I wonder if there might be an outward display rather than you trying to guess what it is. And whether or not through the digital means, we have the intelligence to figure out how someone might be feeling through the frequency of their contact or something like that. I just think there's going to be a greater way of plotting how someone is so that we can serve them better.
Okay.
The reality might be that we still make massive complaints and people don't live up to our expectations, however.
Well, maybe that's life.
Yeah.
We can live in hope.
Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. I mean, that's really interesting. I love the idea that kind of like that you want people to be more proactive. I mean, I think that's something that's just kind of like bubbled up in my sort of onto my radar again over the last kind of like month or so. And wrote something we were saying it's about time that kind of proactive gets put back on the agenda. It's been around for a long time, and it's been an under explored opportunity, I think. But there's great value in there, but it requires that sort of whole effort and emotional intelligence to actually get under the skin of it all, to actually understand what it means to be kind of proactive, particularly when it comes to service and experience.
And let's think about how people are measured. You know, they're not measured for going the extra mile. I mean, it might show up in some sort of satisfaction score potentially, but there's just not enough of it. There just isn't.
Brilliant. So, Sandra, before you go, one final thing. I've been doing some ongoing social research, which I'd like you to be kind of like to take part in, if I may.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it since I published kind of Punk CX in the summer of last year. And I've been asking people to do like a word association sort of game. So I've been asking people for 2 questions for 2 things, right? And the first question is, what one word would you use to describe a more punk approach to experience? Like 1 or 2 words.
Fearless.
Fearless.
Has that been said before?
I have no idea. Let me kind of check, because I have a kind of a catalogue kind of them.
Feels a bit like Top Gear. Am I going to be in the top rank for saying that? I hope so.
Well, there's a whole bunch of kind of ones that have been kind of given to me. Oh, no, yeah, I've got my list. No.
Yes, top of the score.
You know, just got I'm going to write it down. Fearless, brilliant. That's come from Sandra Thompson. You heard it here first, folks. That's brilliant. I've got a list that's probably about 40 words long right now, and I keep sort of like adding to them. But the second one is, what company or brand do you think epitomizes a more punk approach or a punk ethos?
Have you heard of the Adventurists?
The Adventurists?
Yeah. So they are responsible for the Rickshaw Run and the Mongol Rally.
Right.
The idea is that you get a car or you get a tuk-tuk and you cross a particular set of continents. Their communication, what they do is fearless, and it's reckless, and it's high energy, and they don't care. You just got to get from A to B. They don't care how you get there as long as you don't break the law.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. So yeah, the Adventurists, check them out.
Awesome. Sandra, that's been brilliant. I mean, thank you for that. Thank you for one, sharing your time and your experience with us today. 2, for blazing a trail for emotional intelligence and kind of folding emotional intelligence into the whole experience kind of like mix, and making it a thing that is rather than actually a practical skill that one can develop, rather than us talking about emotion and empathy and things. Well, emotional intelligence is something that we actually can go and do, and we can train for, and we get better at. So actually kind of being part of that, to start that conversation and to kind of and to educate people towards that, I think you're doing a great job on that. And I just wanted to say thank you for all of that and all of that you do.
Thank you, Adrian. This has been a blast.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people, and it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.